Hi, my name is Rachel Swanson, and today I will be talking to you guys about reed making. So we're going to talk about two different styles of reed making, the European and the American style, also known as the short and long scrape. So I just wanted to start out with a quote about the importance of being a good reed maker. So unlike most other wind instruments, which have some sort of permanent mouthpiece or embouchure plate, the whole mouthpiece of the oboe must be constructed of a material that is not of a permanent nature. The oboist attempts to make a reed that will satisfy his personal requirements, but because of the destructibility of the oboe reed cane, it is important to be able to duplicate each reed as closely as possible. So here are some materials that we'll need. Cane, we're going to use 10 to 10.5. That's discussing the width of the reed. That's for the American style, and then the European style will be 10.5 to 11. A mandrel, double F nylon thread, a 47 millimeter staple, reed knife, plaque. We're going to use a flat plaque for the American style and a contoured for the European. Cutting block, razor blade, sandpaper, beeswax, micrometer, sharpening stone, ruler in millimeters, shaper tip and handle, an easel and wire if needed for the European style. I'll go into further detail about these tools later. Alright, so basically the American scrape, as I said earlier, we're talking about a long scrape and a short scrape. So as you can see here, this reed is backlit. The tip is our thinnest point. And the long scrape is basically, the reed is entirely scraped from the tip to the string. There's, say, about 2 millimeters here that's unscraped. And also there's no wire used on this reed or gold beater skin. The European scrape, however, is called the short scrape because only half the reed is scraped and half is left as bark. And you can also see here that wire is used on most European reeds. Another important differentiation between both styles of reeds is that the European style has no overlap. So if you can picture two blades of cane, two thin pieces of wood, they're stacked directly on top of one another. As for the American scrape, we overlap ours to the left side. This helps with sealing the sides of the cane. All right, so let's talk about the process. The first thing I wanted to discuss was the quality of the oboe cane. We're talking about kind of agriculture here. So when the cane is farmed, farmers will look for certain qualities in the cane to know that it's selectable. For instance, this piece of cane, it has slight watermarks on it, if you can see these brown kind of marks on it. As for this piece of cane, which has none. It depends on the player as to which you prefer. I prefer watermarks personally. I think it kind of deepens the sound, darkens the tone. But basically, the farmer takes care of taking the cane and generally shaping it into different sizes for the American scrape and for the for the European and the American. So there will be a thicker piece of cane, a wider for the European and a thinner for the American. We can also discuss the color of the cane too. This one would be more of a goldish tone, and this one is slightly yellow. It depends on the player to which you prefer. After the cane is sectioned into pieces and gouged, we go through the shaping process. So we have our shaper tip here and our shaper handle here. So basically, we take our unshaped piece of cane, we score it in half, and we fold it over our shaper tip. Different players use different shaper tips depending on what they're trying to get out of their reeds. I tend to go for a thinner shape because I feel like the intonation is better. A European shaper tip would be slightly thicker in the heart area. So once we've folded over our piece of cane, we take a razor blade and we shape the cane to the specifications of our shaper tip. And we end up with this. Once that's done, we fold our piece over our staple here, using a mandrel. The purpose of the mandrel is to keep the shape of this brass tubing while we tie. So imagine tying our string, and we have to use a lot of force to be able to seal the sides. We don't want our brass tube to misshape at all. And then our finished blank looks something like this. So unscraped, tied, but ready to go for scraping. I would at this point put the reed away and allow it to set, because as I said earlier, this is an organic material. It's not a permanent material, and we need to let it change with the weather. We need to let it settle in. After that process is done, I would begin scraping. For the American style reed, we are talking about a long scrape, so I would begin by plow scraping the entire reed. Then I would begin with the tip, as with the European style also. So our tip is always going to be our thinnest part because it will start the vibration of the note. It's the first thing that our tongue touches. So as you can see here, I use a mountaintop shape for my reeds, and the European tip is much, much smaller, and theirs is kind of a curve. So I would plow scrape all the way, then I would add my shoulders here. So that should be the second thinnest part. And then we leave some thickness here in the heart. That helps deepen the tone, that helps keep the intonation stable. These are my general measurements also for the American scrape. Measuring from the bottom of the tube up to our shoulders at the bottom of the plateau or the heart is 60 to 60.5 millimeters. The beginning of the tip is 65 millimeters. And my tie length is 72.5 with a finishing length of 70 millimeters. That's to tune to 440 hertz A. The European scrape is slightly different measurements. They tie at about 73.5. It'll be a little bit longer of a finished reed with approximately a finishing length of 72. The beginning of the scrape occurs at about 13 millimeters below the tied length, and finished length, it should be about 11 below the top. So what I would do to make a European reed would be to scrape all this first, and instead of having a defined tip as in the American reed, we're going to have a gradual slope. So if you can picture an American reed going from the string to the tip, it's going to be something like this, and then the tip is going to be inverted drastically, whereas the European style will be bark and then a gradual decline into the thinnest part of the tip. So that's basically the difference between the short scrape and the long scrape reed. As you can see here, these are two examples of finished reeds in the European and American style. So we have what's used here is cling wrap, or some people use gold beater skin. A much smaller tip, where the American has a longer tip and a slightly different shape. And then you can't really see under the cling wrap, but this is all bark left under here, whereas the American scrape is scraped all the way down to the string. For a European reed, I would tend to use a contour plaque, whereas for an American scrape, I would use a flat plaque. That is all. I hope you enjoyed the differences between the European and American styles. The great thing about having different types of reed processes is that every player can sound different. I hope you don't assume that there are only two styles of reed making. It does vary from country to country and player to player, so it's one great thing about reed making. All right, thanks for listening.